Welcome to the Digital Marketing Insights podcast, brought to you by Brightside Digital.
Hi everyone, welcome to the show. I'm delighted to say we have Ben today, who's Head of Digital and New Revenue Development. Ben, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome, Ben. Ben, can we start off by you telling everyone a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your career to date, please?
Yeah, so I'm a dad of three girls under five, so I'm living in a very busy household at the moment with an 8-week-old at home as well. So we're a bit manic, but no, yeah, my career to date has spanned, I guess, media broadcasters in general. It's kind of the disciplines that I've worked in have been a range and a breadth of different disciplines. So my background in training is I have a degree and a master's in marketing, in pure marketing. I worked in market research. I've worked in digital, of course, communications, marketing strategy, content strategy, and commercial as well. So there's been kind of a real breadth to my career, which has been deliberate from my perspective to make sure that I kind of have that uh, well kind of range of skills. And I think all of the experience that I have is relevant for each of the roles that I've had. So it's taken me from, working for the Walt Disney Company to, outdoor advertising, to other broadcasters as well. So I worked in Australia for a number of years, and I worked for the Walt Disney Company across Australia and New Zealand. I worked for Foxtel, which is essentially Sky over in Australia, and Channel 9, which is one of the biggest commercial broadcasters over there as well. And then since moving back, I've worked with Heineken across their portfolio of brands, so not just Heineken brands. So that would include Heineken, Heineken Zero, all of their cider brands, Orchard Thieves, Appleman's, and then Coors Light, Birra Moretti, their stouts. All they have a huge portfolio of brands. So I got an opportunity to work across all of those and work through the kind of marketing strategy for those, which is really interesting. And then most recently, I've been working in Virgin Media Television. So going back to kind of my roots in the broadcast space, which I find fascinating and I have a real passion for. But really focusing on initially, I came in and I headed up the client solutions, which was really a commercial role, selling across products across the portfolio. And at the moment, for the last number of years, I've been working as the head of digital and new revenue development, as you said. And my remit there is really to kind of focus on, well, as TV and as media consumption changes, how do we as a business grow and how do we grow our revenue specifically over the next 5-10 years? And the answer to that from our perspective is really focusing on the digital asset. So particularly the Virgin Media player, so the broadcast video on demand player, and how can we actually build revenue for that over time? And also, I guess separate to that, it's also the new revenue development. So focusing on any different areas that we can start to kind of turn it on top of revenue over time and look at scaling. So it's really focusing on beyond the player, what else do we need to look at in order to grow as a business? So it's been really fascinating. It's been very future focused for me and looking at kind of trends and looking at what works and in some cases being a test company for technology and introducing technology as well. So it's been a really, really interesting journey. But yeah, I guess to sum up, my career has been varied across numerous different industries and disciplines as well.
Love it. And so, what would you see is your main strength in digital and the work you do? What do you double down on? Where's your comfort zone for helping a business?
Well, I guess my comfort zone is probably, I think, my background in research is a really good starting point. It's a really good anchoring point, I think, for any area that you're looking to get into. And I think particularly in digital, it really helps you understand, um, you know, big data, understanding huge amount of data, how you can kind of process it and analyze it. So, I would have a lot of experience in that sense. But I think probably the biggest strength has been I work with a huge amount of very technical people who are down in the weeds of technical development, and that's not necessarily my skill set in that. But I think what I am good at is being a bridge between, the rest of the business and the digital element of the business in translating, because you can have people who are very, very technical who actually struggle to translate that back to why it's really important for a business to be investing in. Because I think with digital, particularly, it's all about proving the return on investment for a business. They need to understand, well, if we are going to invest in this technology, why are we going to do that? What does the return look like? So it's looking at that kind of technology and putting together a business case, presenting that back to the business and taking people along that journey and communicating that effectively. And sometimes that can be lost in translation, I think, when you're talking digital lingo. So I
Yeah,
think
of
that for me
course.
is a really important feature.
And what would you see is your main like platform, I suppose, for analyzing your analytics? What's your go-tos? What do you refer to when you're doing your data?
Well, we've got, so at the moment we're looking at bringing in numerous different analytical tools for the player, particularly. In the past, we have had Universal Analytics, and now are looking at GA4, Google Analytics 4. So that's been a real focus for me over the last year or so, and really trying to implement that, and that's a really, really useful tool. I think it's primarily built for web pages, for page impressions, things like that. But I think using it in a very different way has been our focus as a business, and my focus particularly on looking at video consumption as well.
Yeah.
Video consumption as a whole across the world and in Ireland is growing and growing, growing. So being able to really understand what people are watching when they're watching is hugely important. And I think you're going to see a lot of companies putting a huge amount of resource into trying to understand that to a greater depth.
And like there is a whole section in GA4 around video impressions and video plays, whether it's 25, 50, or you can set that for how much a program is being watched. But is there anything you see there? Because when you said GA4, I was thinking, oh wow, it's very much an e-commerce shop primarily focused platform, but then obviously it has the other factors and for you to apply it for video. But is there anything there that you kind of blew you away of like, oh wow, that's a brilliant source that I can refer to and use as like a traffic driver?
Well, for me, it was really focusing on, well, what are we actually trying to gain from this? So obviously, it's understanding analytics behind, users and people visiting the player itself. But what's the longer term goal? So there's the nice to have, and then there's the what we're actually trying to do with this. And ultimately, what you're trying to do is create a personalized experience for users so that they get better content recommendations. We can feed them through recommendations, or we can market towards them relevant information based on what their usage has been. And down the line, then potentially you could serve personalized ads based on their profile, and so on. So that's ultimately what you're trying to get to. And so, when we were looking at different tools, analytical tools around this, it was looking at that kind of real future focused perspective and saying, well, what's the best way? And I think when you look at Google Ad Manager specifically and Google Analytics, the integration there is very simplified. So that for me is a big selling point in terms of being able to target or have addressable advertising down the line as well.
Brilliant. And my last question on that is, I suppose from your point of view, just to talk strictly the Virgin Media player, I suppose device is a big thing. So, I can imagine the largest consumption is mobile or a laptop or a tablet kind of setup, because it's not seamlessly built into a TV, and then people probably just watch the normal TV stations, and then you're almost, if you do enter that market, you're creating your player as a competition to your flagship TV stations as well, which I can imagine is a challenge.
Yeah, it's a really good point. For us, it's really, I think anything that we're doing strategically like that is making sure that it's going to be beneficial for us as a business from a revenue perspective, but also making sure that people can view our content wherever and whenever they would like. And so, broadly, when you're looking at the overall industry, like if you're looking at the TV consumption industry, the TV industry, consumption is really fragmenting. So, back, you know, decades ago, there was, 4 channels available. It was much easier. Whereas nowadays, people, of their own specific content within a household, they'll watch something on their own. They'll take their laptop or they'll take their phone, as you said. That's hugely popular. We've got Love Island on our platform at the moment, so that's such a popular show, and we see device usage go through the roof for that. And typically, mobile has really, really been a powerhouse in that sense of people taking it away from the main screen and going off and watching it themselves. But what we have seen is a real shift in that at the moment. So we've seen a real increase in connected TVs, particularly. So you see, Samsung, LGs, Android, iOS, all of these are coming into the market, and it, I think from an experiential point of view, people actually want to watch on the big screen, the main screen. So we're seeing a movement back towards that, with more content being available on these platforms, and we work with them as well to make sure there are contents available across those platforms as well. But it's we're seeing a real shift. So we're seeing a boost in connected TVs hugely over the last while, and that's very important. But just to your point on cannibalization, I think that's where we have to acknowledge that there is a change in consumption and not necessarily overall consumption. So if you look at viewership across platforms, whether it's on your television set or whether it's on your phone or tablet or whatever that may be, um, you can see that viewership is increasing because there's never been so much content in the market available at one point in time. And so there's something for everyone. And so when you do look at the overall trend of television viewing, it might be softening, but where are they going to? They're going to, if we look at our player numbers, are through the roof. Of course, you've got subscription video on demand services that are doing really, really well as well. And we can kind of talk about that a little bit down the line, but there's a huge amount of content available for people. So for us, it's just about making sure that if people are looking for our content, and we're very confident in our content, that it's available to them across any device that they're looking for.
Brilliant. And a slight switch up here, but is there any campaign maybe now or in your previous roles that you're really proud of, and something that you did to make it really successful? Is there any particular campaign that springs to mind?
I guess the first thing that springs to mind is it was going back a couple of years back now, was when I launched the Love Island online store. So we obviously have Love Island, which is one of the biggest shows all year in a lot of people's calendars, and it's typically on during the summer. And it was an area that I had really targeted as it needs to be a commercial focus for us, and something that we need to look at expanding our revenues across. And so around that time, I launched the Love Island online shop in Ireland. So traditionally, prior to that, it was set up in the UK and other countries, but we launched one specifically for Ireland. And so that was a real challenge for me. It was a really interesting, exciting one to do as well. So we sold, the Love Island water bottles that you can see within the show, towels, keyrings, you name it, we had it. And so that was really, really fascinating to watch that. So it was obviously from an idea, and then I partnered with ITV to kind of work through that as well in terms of the product, the spec, um, manufacturing and delivery as well, because all of the products were personalized as well to the person, so you could get your name on any of them.
Yeah.
Shipping, delivery, and then the area that I obviously really honed in on was the marketing of it. So making sure that we could actually talk to most people, anyone who's looking for one could access it and get it. So that was a kind of an all-encompassing campaign that I worked through and made sure that we used, our own platforms first, and then looked off-platform as well across some digital and social channels as well. So it was a really, really proud one for me, and it's a nice one to be able to see you're working on this project kind of religiously for a number of weeks and months, and then you can walk around, you can see people actually drinking out of a water bottle in the gym, or walking down the road at one. So it was a nice tangible one that you could see the results of.
Love it. I can see why you're in charge of new revenue development just with that one idea as well. Um, and is there any particular softwares you use, Ben, maybe daily or maybe not, that really enhance your role? Things that you swear by that you would recommend to our audience?
This is not like an interesting answer, but it's definitely one that I would use a huge amount. Excel. I use Excel constantly. It's something that I use with my research background to build out dashboards within, build out presentations, look at kind of big data models. If I was doing any pricing strategy models, that would be built within Excel. Um, and it's one of those applications that you can use at a really basic level or you can use at a really advanced level. I would say I'm kind of intermediate, I guess. I like to think I'm pretty good at it, but actually, a number of weeks ago, we had somebody internally who is a whiz at Excel take us through some new formulas and everything else, and just it gets deeper and deeper the more you get into it, and it's an incredible tool. So it's not a really exciting one. It's not a sexy one, but it's definitely one that I swear by. And getting good at Excel or getting good at PowerPoint, I think, is hugely important for me in terms of building those business cases that I was talking about why we're doing things and communicating that back to the business.
Yeah, brilliant. And I like to touch on that a little bit more. Do you ever use AI now? Because AI is there is a lot of Excel AI platforms out there. Is there anything you're using to solve formulas or ask questions of developing?
I haven't. I like AI is such a hot topic at the moment, and everywhere I listen or read is talking about AI as obviously the up and coming. So I try to keep up to speed with what's happening there, but I haven't seen anything yet that I have necessarily found an ongoing use for. There's been the odd thing that or app that somebody might let me know about that I find interesting, but not necessarily anything that I'm incorporating into my day-to-day work.
Yeah, brilliant. And is there anywhere where you go, Ben, normally to get new insights and information? Is there anywhere swear
Yeah,
by?
I love we're doing a podcast right now. I love listening to podcasts. So I'm less a person who sits down and reads a huge amount. I much prefer audio visual. I kind of absorb information a lot better than that. So I listen to a huge amount of podcasts, varying from things like there's one called Stock Club, which is an Irish one. It's obviously talking about from a stock investment perspective, but what I found it's really really useful in finding out about new up and coming tech startups and tech businesses as well, and it's a good way to keep on top of emerging technologies. So they'll do reviews of in-depth reviews of the business model, what it looks like and what it's doing, ranging from Twitter or Spotify down to kind of those small tech startups. So I find that really, really interesting. Um, and I listen to a daily news update from the Financial Times. I find really, really helpful. It's like a 5 minute condensed down podcast, which will just tell you what's going on in the world and what's happening, which I find really useful. But they do have more in depth kind of uh, episodes. And then, yeah, I listen to podcasts on, lots of other stuff around exercise, nutrition, rugby. Um, I also listen to one on, there's one I listen to on negotiation as well. I think it's called Negotiate Anything. And I started listening to it obviously from a work perspective because in everyone's profession, they're going to need those kind of skills in negotiating a contract or dealing with a supplier or but we also recently bought a house, so actually that was the main purpose of me doing that, was to be able to negotiate the price down of our house. um, kind of I vary in terms of the what I consume, but it's mainly through podcasts. I find is very useful.
Love it. And one of the questions I want to run by you, which is kind of new to the show, but it's what would you see as the biggest opportunity in digital now? So let's kind of put our like think about the audience listening and maybe SMEs and what you see, what you would recommend. Is there any opportunity in digital right now that you know or you experience saying this is what you should focus on?
Well, I think, particularly from, an advertising perspective, or trying to speak out and communicate, I think we're seeing the deprecation of third-party cookies with Google. So with that, there's a huge opportunity for, companies across the world, and there'll be a real focus for first-party data, I think, particularly. So data that they own themselves. And that's going to be, I think that's going to be easier for some companies, difficult for others. You have subscription companies who will find it very easy because they're already collecting that first party data information. But for companies that aren't, it's really about putting together a strategy in order to work through how they're going to collect it. And with GDPR now in place, which is terrific because it really um, provide security for for everyone in usage of their data. But it means a real challenge for businesses in working through, well, what's our strategy? What kind of data do we want to collect? We need rationale between every single data field that we are looking to collect as well. Otherwise, it's not going to be possible. And then what can we do with that data? So then you get into the analytical tools, marketing opportunities specifically. And, for us as a business and an industry, I think that's a really interesting challenge. You've got, in media specifically, you've got subscription services like Netflix. You'll find it very, very easy. But, if you look to the UK, ITV have a broadcast player as well, but they've also incorporated ITVX, which is their new player and has a subscription element to it. And obviously, Netflix have just launched their ad tier, so it means that they can actually serve ads to people. So what we're seeing is kind of a real shift and a merging almost of business models between subscription video on demand and broadcast video on demand.
Yeah.
And so with that brings, I think, huge opportunity, but a real reliance on data. And I think that's going to be the real focus. And I think people can really see the value in actually collecting data and understanding who their customers are, being able to speak to them. And I think when you talk to customers specifically as well, they want to make sure that any ads that are or that they're served are relevant to them, aren't completely irrelevant at all. Um, and are appropriate as well. So that's I think the security behind it, but also the relevance is really important. So it'll be very important for companies going forward.
Yeah, and like obviously YouTube's now gone YouTube Premium to kind of skip the ads and stuff. That is a really interesting space where, because obviously Virgin Media, you have your ads, I suppose, before an episode and stuff, but you don't necessarily intrude when someone's watching a live show and for nothing away from. Well, actually, I with Virgin Media Player, if you're watching the live TV, normally, like if I watched the rugby or something, it would just have a kind of holding page in between the aspects. So you're watching the live sport, but you might not watch the commentary or something in between. Am I right in saying that?
That's right, yeah. So you'll get a pre-roll, and then you'll prior to the stream starting, and then once the stream goes into it, you can get ad served. Let's say it's a half time, or so it's not going to be a break in play or anything like that. And so we do have some mid rolls that will feature throughout the broadcast at relevant intervals, but then you wouldn't necessarily get as many ads. So you might have a break, or there might be a promo on or something like that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, like, is that something you focus on? Because I suppose at the end of the day, that's where these stations make their money is the advertising, and that's what pays the bills. So is that something you would talk about personalized ads and stuff? It's just about collecting that data and getting better at and getting better packages for sponsors and so forth.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that's what sponsors want to be able to reach a specific audience. They want less wastage, and I think if you go to social channels like if they're going onto Instagram or TikTok or whatever that may be, that's all obviously automatically collected on sign up. So you're able to have targeted campaigns. Well, that should be no different across all media that you're looking to target. And so being able to target specifically on that is going to be really, really useful, I think, for broadcasters to sell into, prospective clients and advertisers in order to be able to target people. So I do think that's going to be. I think Netflix coming in with a tier that has ad serving means they're now in the the ad space. So that's going to be it's going to be a really interesting one to see how that actually impacts the whole ad market. They'll obviously be able to target. They've got, some good shows, but they don't necessarily have live content as well. And a huge amount of content is still consumed live. Our sports. We have the Six Nations on every year. We have the Rugby World Cup coming up in September, which is going to be huge for us. We've obviously got Love Island, and there's, again, people kind of say, I hear people say to me, TV is dead and all of this stuff. Well, if you actually look at the numbers, particularly as I said, for the player, it's through the roof, particularly things like Love Island, and that does skew younger. It has a much younger demographic than you might see on a lot of other shows. So I think it's I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. And I think with TV as well, you would have had decades there that very little happened in the TV market, and I think it's actually a fascinating time to be in TV, and particularly digital within TV, because the worlds are colliding and merging.
Yeah.
And your definition of TV has changed. People would have said traditional media, and then there's digital media. But if people are watching Love Island or Six Nations or the Rugby World Cup on the player on their connected TV, is that television, or is that you know is that digital television? And Netflix, is that television, is it digital television? So the worlds are merging, and the lines are blurring a huge amount, which makes it very exciting to be in the business, because it really means that to stay within the business, to stay competitive, and to provide your clients with what they need and your audiences for what they need, you need to continuously evolve and invest in the digital side of the business, because that is where it's slowly moving towards. And so there are businesses that I've seen that have not kept up with that, and they've paid the price. They have a worse experience for their consumers and their audiences, and also it's going to hit their revenue lines as well. So I think it's a fascinating one to be in.
Just my last point on this side of things. You might not have seen it, so I might be just talking to myself, but Amazon have done a deal where they're promoting some NFL games in America for the first time. And obviously the American market, and especially around NFL in terms of the sport itself and stuff, they're light years ahead of everything else out there, even any kind of major football setup. And what I thought was really interesting, what Amazon's done is they're trying to digitalize their live sports shows. So this year will be the first year Amazon, in the NFL games, they'll try and analyze the defense, and they'll highlight you. It's an option on their digital service, but you can highlight which players are about to blitz. Like they're trying to anticipate the moves and the motion of the quarterback and stuff. And there's I think they said on what I saw on it, and it was just a video around their enhancements, but there's 20 additional in play. And actually one of the big ones is the line for the third down. So for anyone not familiar with NFL, there's 4 phases of play, and they have to get 10 yards within that 4 phases of play. And within the third and fourth, it's all about trying to get those last inches or yards or whatever to hit the fourth play. But now part of Amazon's service, and they're the first ones to do it, they're putting a digital line on the pitch so everyone can see what the team needs to get it. So they're overlaying a digital element, and obviously very interesting for this conversation stuff and showing you where the market's going. But I thought, do you have any thoughts on that? Have you heard much about this kind of play, or?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think, particularly being in the digital side of things, I get a lot of companies, approaching me and contacting me with, different engagement tools and different tools that they could apply to your broadcast. And there is a huge amount out there. That sounds like a really interesting one as well. And in areas that we usually invest in, it needs to obviously make sense from a revenue perspective, but also from the audience perspective. We've invested in things like, we have a feature at the moment, which is you can we'll have, let's say, a voting mechanism, and you can vote you just scan the QR code and vote via your mobile, and the engagement results will come up on the screen in real time. So what it means is that let's say it's halftime during a rugby match, people can actually, the analysts can actually look at it, see how it's changing. Say, you know, this person has been voted the best player on the pitch at the moment. And it shapes the content, so you can start discussing people's results, or the results of the poll, or whatever it may be at that time. But there's a huge amount you can do at the moment. Like, I mean, even if you look at the product placement. So obviously you can have product placement within specific shows. Well, there is technology that you can do product placement in, you know, in your post product placement. So following the completion of the show, you can actually digitally put products within the show to make sure that they're represented and they're seen on screen as well. There's those kind of things that you know, I haven't necessarily used, but those tools available. So I think it's a really interesting space, because you'll see places trying to really innovate and see how they can kind of push the boundaries of television out and make it a more interactive experience. And I think that's fascinating, because the only ones that'll work are the ones that people actually enjoy and want to engage with. And, you know, the ones that are irritating or annoying, or don't, you know, provide any value to the viewer, then will not, and they'll fall to the side. But it's really interesting to see. And I think, you know, in the States, they're obviously, I think, probably leading the way in that sense. But I think, you know, there's lots of different markets, and I think particularly, you know, we keep an eye on different markets. Obviously, I've had a career over in Australia as well, so I always keep an eye on what's happening there in terms of technology and targeting, and any developments there. But it's no, that's why I say it's a really interesting space to be in, because there's constant innovation where there wasn't necessarily traditionally.
Yeah. You have a cool job, Ben. No doubt about it. And lastly, obviously, I have to ask you the last question around the show, which is a question that tries to understand you a little bit more. And my question is, if you could bottle up one personality trait that you have yourself, Ben, that you could pass on to others, what would it be?
That's a tough one. I guess since becoming a dad, I've probably become more empathetic. I think you see your kids interacting with other kids, and you see the different dynamics. You see the kid that's a bit obnoxious and pushes people around, and then another kid that's really quiet and vulnerable, and there's the kind of loud one, and all these different personalities. And I think since having kids, it makes you really empathetic to, well, why are they acting that way, or why do you think, you know? So it's trying to understand, put yourself in their shoes, not necessarily sympathetic, but definitely empathetic, and understanding why they might be doing something. And for me, I think that's really helped work wise as well. In I think nobody's ever the bad guy in their own opinion. And so when you're having a, you know, discussion or a disagreement, or somebody's on the other side of the fence to you, it's always good to understand, well, where are they coming from? Why are they acting that way? Or if they lashed out, why are they speaking to me like that? Or so I think for me, that's definitely kind of changed me and how I view interactions like that. I don't necessarily always take it at face value. I try and figure out like what's going on behind the scenes is making them do that. As I said, it's not always sympathetic. I don't always take kindly to that kind of stuff, but it's really interesting. And I think it's just, you've got the playground where your kids are running around. There's all these different personalities. It's no different to work and everyday life.
Brilliant answer, Ben. That's it. Thanks so much for being interviewed, Ben. If anyone wants to reach out or touch base with you or ask you anything, how can they get in touch with you?
Probably the best way is LinkedIn. So I think that's Ben Mulligan. Search Ben Mulligan on LinkedIn.
Love it. I'll tag you in a post and everything after. But Ben, thank you so much for being on the show. Thanks everyone for watching, listening, everything else.
Thanks, Tom.